On this week's Tier List Tuesday, it's Pink Floyd. Originally formed in 1965 as the Pink Floyd Sound, Pink Floyd is one of the most influential and groundbreaking bands in rock history. Known for their innovative soundscapes, conceptual albums, and thought-provoking lyrics, they arguably pioneered the progressive rock genre. Their iconic albums such as The Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and The Wall redefined music and remain timeless. Pink Floyd's legacy endures through their profound cultural impact, blending art, music, and introspective exploration of the human experience. And I would also like to add that I love Pink Floyd. Always have, always will. They're one of my favorite bands. Top 5. I don't know if my parents ever figured this out, but if I was listening to The Wall, I was depressed about something. So after last week's fairly well-received David Gilmour tier list, I thought I'd take a meaningful dive into the deep, expansive, murky waters of the Pink Floyd discography. That means we're starting with The Piper at the Gates of Dawn from 1967. I was 1.5 when this album was released, and as such, my parents weren't too keen on letting me trip on some acid to get the full Piper experience. So, my opinion of this album at the time was something like, Ball, Daddy, Juice, all gone. But there was one song that began with like, doi, 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 and I liked that one. I didn't start listening to Pink Floyd until the early 80s. I wasn't that age yet. I didn't listen to The Piper at the Gates of Dawn until the late 80s, because I wanted to say that I had heard it. This album has so much of Syd Barrett's psychedelic influence. It's dominant on this album. It's an iconic British psychedelic rock album. Interstellar Overdrive. This band was willing to experiment with whatever they had in the studio. And they were great at it. The musicianship, the quality of the musicianship showed here. This album was recorded at Abbey Road. At the same time, Sgt. Pepper was being recorded. So, you got something going on there. And it ends with the song Bike, which tricks you into thinking that somehow a Herman's Hermit song snuck onto this album somewhere, at least at the beginning. I'm going to say it's a pretty good album, but I never found any sort of way to love this album. I've maybe only ever listened to it a couple of times. And then it's 1968's Saucerful of Secrets. 2 words. Space rock. Jug Band Blues is the only song in this album with Syd Barrett. It's not my favorite Pink Floyd song. This album is more of the same, just a little bit less, even though it marks the debut of David Gilmour. It's a little less psychedelic and a little more spacey, which some people would argue kind of occupy the same space. Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun really appeals to me on this album for some reason. The title track is darker, more experimental. This album is weirder than The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. I think this album's just okay. The soundtrack to the movie More in 1969. What a strange album this is. You can dial up the Nile Song. And the first time I heard it, I thought this could easily be like a Black Sabbath song. I could hear Ozzy Osbourne doing the vocals on this song. Probably the heaviest song in the Pink Floyd catalog. I'd have to think about that to be sure. I don't know if I'd call it a proto-metal, but I think it was called acid rock at that time. You're okay, More soundtrack. This is what happened in 1969. Ummagumma, half live, half studio. The half studio side features solo compositions from each member, and extended versions of earlier songs on the live side. The studio side has some really strange experimental moments. Several species of small furry animals gathered together on a cave and grooving with a pict. Can you imagine if that had been a video on MTV in the early 80s? The name of that song would have been half the TV screen. Ummagumma, I'm being nice by saying it's okay. I didn't really... The live albums, okay, it's not bad. It's okay. It's worthy of being okay. 1970, Atom Heart Mother, Pink Floyd's first #1 album in the UK. Cow! Tell me this is where Pink Floyd began the transition into the Pink Floyd we think of and love today, really. I would tell you that I agree with that. The title track is nearly 24 minutes long. Take that, Taylor Swift. Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast is not about Alan Parsons, by the way, as a lot of people mistakenly believe. I just wonder if this is where the band said, I think we've got as much mileage out of this whole psychedelic thing as we're going to get. That's kind of how I feel. I like Atom Heart Mother. I don't love Atom Heart Mother. Relics came along in 1971. It was a collection of singles and tracks from the early albums. In my estimation, there is no need for Relics. Meddle also was released in 1971. This was my first pre-classic era Pink Floyd album. I picked it up on a pretty worn-out cassette tape, $2 or $3, and as soon as I heard, "One of these days I'm going to cut you into little pieces," I said, "Tell me more, early Pink Floyd, tell me more." Another album with a sidelong track called Echoes, which is utterly amazing. This is a very listenable Pink Floyd album, a harbinger of things to come, a nice reset following up Adam Heart Mother. It's a pretty good Pink Floyd album. The Obscured by Clouds soundtrack in 1972. Now, the band was already working on Dark Side of the Moon when they wrote and recorded this album. And listen to Burning Bridges and tell me you don't hear Dark Side of the Moon. Listen to Childhood's End and tell me you don't hear it. Obscured by Clouds is actually pretty good. I can't help but think that the band said to themselves, we're on to something here. So perhaps you've heard of 1973's The Dark Side of the Moon, the iconic Storm Thorgerson cover, the 950 weeks on the Billboard 200 chart, the 45 million copies sold worldwide. Money! The band's first American pop hit, considered by some to be the greatest concept album of all time, the best-selling concept album of all time. Not really sure what I can say about this album that hasn't already been said, other than, and this is just some real talk coming from me here, the first time I listened to it, by the time I actually got this album, it had been so overhyped to me. Most of my Pink Floyd experience at that point was the final cut on The Wall. Dramatic, one gut punch after another, Roger Waters on the edge of a mental breakdown, Gilmour's guitar slicing through everything in its path. Well, if Dark Side of the Moon is their best, it must be the best of all of that. And Dark Side of the Moon never really goes there. It's a fairly mellow album in a lot of ways. But as time has gone by, I've really come to appreciate what a no-skips masterpiece Dark Side of the Moon is. I was not blown away by it at the time, but I have never actually stopped listening to it. It's still a great listen. It's a great listen to this day. I think maybe it gets better every time I hear it. And I've been hearing it for 40 years. Also in 1973, the shameless cash grab, A Nice Pair. This is a compilation that repackaged the first two albums. Capitol Records knew that Dark Side was their last studio album from the band that they would get, or maybe EMI, I guess I should say. And then Dark Side blew up. They didn't see that coming, so what can we do to make some money off this whole Pink Floyd thing? So there you go, A Nice Pair, the first two albums reissued. 1975, Wish You Were Here, the tribute to Syd Barrett, who by this time was very much no longer than himself, so to speak. Another concept album from the band. The band's chemistry was beginning to wane at this point that this album was being put together. The album cover is about the fear of getting burned when you enter into an agreement with a business partner. It was a dig at the music industry's dehumanization of musicians, by the way. Speaking of by the way, which one's Pink? This album's regard grew over time because it followed up Dark Side of the Moon. A lot of people were kind of let down, but since then, I don't think anyone would argue that it is a great, great album. It is a fantastic Pink Floyd album. Not just a fantastic Pink Floyd album, a fantastic album. In some ways, at this point, I almost enjoy Wish You Were Here better than Dark Side of the Moon. Probably because I've listened to it less overall. Animals in 1977, inspired by George Orwell's Animal Farm. And the ladies start to swoon every time you say that, don't they? This album's subject matter is a bit darker than Wish You Were Here, and the music reflects that. A lot of different social issues, going after the social elites. You can guess who the sheep were that Roger Waters is singing about. The album cover is really probably more highly regarded than the album itself, although I would argue that it's note for note probably just as good as Dark Side of the Moon or Wish You Were Here. It just isn't as enjoyable as either of those albums, if that makes sense. Still, on a 1 to 10 scale, it's an 8, maybe even a 9, depending on what day of the week you're listening to it, I suppose. In 1979, The Wall, the rock opera centering on the study of Pink, a character descending into isolation. It is the best-selling double album of all time. Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 is a #1 pop hit in the UK and the US, driven mostly by a young audience that probably didn't exactly get what the song was all about. Comfortably Numb is still a staple of classic rock radio. Signature David Gilmour solo. A film adaptation of The Wall was released in 1982, which further enhanced its cultural legacy, and for a lot of people, for a lot of millennials and Gen Y types, I would venture it's their introduction to Pink Floyd. It remains one of the most ambitious concept albums in rock history. It is definitely the best album of ever that explores themes of alienation, trauma, and fascism, and I would still say it's my personal favorite Pink Floyd album. I had a deep emotional connection to this album for a good chunk of the 80s. It was my go-to album if I felt kind of bleak in any way at all. 1981, it's a collection of great dance songs. I love the ironic title. If you're familiar with Pink Floyd and you saw this title, you were like, ha 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 ha. Money was re-recorded for this because Capitol Records would not license it to Columbia, so there you go. The cut of Shine On You Crazy Diamond is different. The 7-inch edit of Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 is on here. I'm going to say that it's worth having because I found it interesting how some of the small track selection that it is, how they were reassembled for the collection. I'm going to say it's a pretty good compilation. A little short, but greatest hits albums were back in those days. In 1983, The Final Cut, essentially a Roger Waters solo album with minimal input from the rest of the band. It serves as a critique of war. The Falklands War was going on at that time. Probably, it might be the most politically charged album in the Pink Floyd library. Waters left the band shortly after its release. There were creative differences. This is probably the darkest album in their discography. The production is fairly sparse compared to The Wall and maybe Animals. This was the first Pink Floyd album that I personally owned, that I personally bought. And I know what you might be thinking, and you still became a Pink Floyd fan? Seriously, I loved the theatricality of this album. The Cold War was arguably at peak levels at the time, so I was doing a little bit of worrying about nuclear war. So this album spoke to that, so it spoke to me. And in spite of, I know what some people might think about me doing this, I'm going to say it was a great album. It's a great album to me. It was a great album to me. Also in 1983, Works, with some alternate mixes of cuts from Dark Side of the Moon. Everything on here is pre-Columbia. This is really an album for completists. I don't know, if it streams on Spotify, listen to it and get your own opinion, I suppose. 1987, A Momentary Lapse of Reason. Roger Waters is gone, but the previously dispatched Richard Wright rejoins the band for some of the tracks anyway. The lawsuits, the well-attended concerts, the poorly attended concerts. So much drama around this album. And a lot of people said this is not a Pink Floyd album, it's a David Gilmour solo album. Well, there's no Roger Waters on it, so I guess you could make that argument. The album heavily leaned on session musicians like Tony Levin on bass, but you can also say that this album feels like a sort of a reset to the band's mid-70s period. This album is a lot better than The Final Cut. It put Pink Floyd back on the map. It sold really well. It's not a perfect album, but Learning to Fly, On the Turning Away, The Dogs of War, One Slip, it's great. Great, I tell you. Fight me on that. Delicate Sound of Thunder, a live album from 1988. A lot of material from A Momentary Lapse of Reason, some older stuff. It's a decent listen, but it's not great. I bought it. I listened to it once. I filed it away. Most music critics were, I believe it was J.D. Considine that wrote, further proof that you can't listen to a light show. So there you go. It's the 2019 re-release is about 40 minutes longer, so you get the whole show. It's okay. It's okay. I have spoken. So in 1992, everybody's putting out a box set. So of course, Pink Floyd is going to put out a box set. And that box set was called Shine On. It features A Saucerful of Secrets, Meddle, The Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, Animals, The Wall, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, and an extra disc called The Early Singles, which gathered the first 5 7-inch singles and their B-sides on one compilation on CD. Shine On is, I'm just going to be real honest with you. Unless you really want to have all the artwork and the booklet and yada, yada, yada. At this point in time, there are better collections. If you really want to collect, if you want to get all the Pink Floyd. In 1994, it was The Division Bell. High Hopes, great song. More melodic album than Momentary Lapse of Reason. This was recorded on Gilmour's boat, the Astoria. His now wife, Polly Sampson, receives a lot of writing credit on this album, a trend that has since continued. This was a #1 album in the U.S. Take It Back's on here. What do you want from me? My first and only Pink Floyd concert was this tour, Indianapolis. I did not have great seats, but because the show was so big, I still had great seats. So if you've never seen Pink Floyd live, that was my takeaway from that in early 1994. I got to put it somewhere. This is also a great Pink Floyd album. Don't fight me on this. 1995, Pulse. A 2.5-hour live album. The early CD versions had this cool blinking LED light powered by a couple of AA batteries. It looked cool on your shelf until it stopped blinking after about a year. The 2022 re-release, I think, also featured the blinking light, if I'm not mistaken. This is another live Pink Floyd album. It's probably slightly better than Delicate Sound of Thunder, but I wouldn't say... unless you just really want to hear live Pink Floyd albums, I do have a hard time with a band that makes music as lush and orchestral and as precise as Pink Floyd and gumming it up with a lot of crowd noise, if that makes sense. So there you go. And I think that's the reissue album cover of Pulse that I have in this tier list, by the way. In 2000, is there anybody out there? The Wall Live 1980 through 1981. Well, guess what that is? It's The Wall live, with a couple of extra songs that were left off the album, some spoken word parts, some extended solos. This album is an hour and 45 minutes long, which is quite a bit longer than the album, 15-20 minutes longer than the album. Fleshes out the story a little bit. I'm actually going to say that this is a pretty good live album, maybe their best live album, and I do think it is definitely worth a listen. In 2001, Echoes, the best of Pink Floyd. From the first single, Arnold Lane, all the way to High Hopes, on Division Bell, beginning to end. This features the first appearance of When the Tigers Broke Free. That hadn't been on a CD before. It's a 26-track 2-CD compilation that non-chronologically segues one song into another very effectively. It's an interesting listen, because you think it's going to go to one song and it goes into another, and it's not chronological either. It's an engaging listen, from time to time. I wouldn't say it's mandatory, that it's a mandatory part of your collection, but it's pretty good. I really like the way that they put it together. 10 years later, A Foot in the Door, the best of Pink Floyd. This was a single CD release, 16 tracks, part of the Why Pink Floyd campaign. They were doing a lot of reissues in 2011 and 2012. I would just say this is for completists. There's really not anything particularly special about it. It does have a cool album cover. In 2014, it was The Endless River. Man, people hated this. Or a lot of people hated it anyway. I don't know so much that people hated it as just found it puzzling. What is this? Or why isn't it more? Only one track has vocals, the last song on the album, Louder Than Words, which I found to be a pretty solid song. I really enjoyed it. Sure, it could easily be exchanged with many of Gilmour's solo tracks, but so what? The album consists mostly of instrumental outtakes that were left over from the Division Bell. So you get this full album of outtakes from the Division Bell, and it makes you realize the Division Bell could have been a lot more. Also serves as a tribute to late keyboardist Richard Wright. Gilmour and Mason completed the album with very little new material, regarded as a farewell to Pink Floyd's legacy when it came out. I really enjoyed the single. I can't really say that I really thought, as a listening experience, that I didn't think it was that interesting. 2016, The Early Years, from 1965 to 1972. They're formative years, basically. Features previously unreleased tracks, rare live performances, BBC radio sessions. This is jam-packed with a lot of stuff. I'm not going to list everything. It's a deep dive into the band's evolution before they became really successful. And wow. And with me describing it like that, you'd think I was going to put it somewhere great, but I don't know. I didn't really think it added a lot to my Pink Floyd experience. 2019, The Later Years, features a remix of Momentary Lapse of Reason, expanded versions of Delicate Sound of Thunder and Pulse, The Knebworth Show, a previously unreleased concert film, 5.1 surround mixes. This box set, you really get your bang for the buck on this one. I realize this doesn't really represent the golden era of Pink Floyd, and I've already stated some of these live albums aren't particularly exciting, but I would say this is a better box set than the previous box set. It has more interesting stuff on it altogether. There's a lot more to dive into. 2021, Live at Knebworth, 1990. Originally part of the Later Years box set from 2019, 7 tracks. They released this separately out of that box set. If you got the box set, you don't need to buy this individually. It's not particularly interesting, just to be brutally honest with you. It's Pink Floyd live. Hey, Rise Up. In 2022, a one-off single. I think the release of the single had a couple of extra bonus tracks. Proceeds from this went to the Ukraine Humanitarian Relief Fund. Vocals from boombox vocalist Andrei Klinik. I tried. Gilmour was concerned about the whole Ukraine situation, reversed his earlier decision to not reunite Pink Floyd. got in touch with Nick Mason and thought that it was important that they generate some awareness of the war and what was going on and figure out a way to contribute. It's an interesting song because the vocalist is neither Roger Waters. It has a very operatic feel to it. I'm going to say it's pretty good, but I'm also going to say you're not going to listen to it over and over and over again. In 2022, the Animals 2018 remix finally saw the light of day. Opinions vary on this. Some people argue that the animal sounds are boosted too much. I've heard that it's a better experience on 5.1 Blu-ray. Maybe that's awesome. I don't know. I don't know where to put this exactly. I'm just going to put it there. 2023, The Dark Side of the Moon 50th Anniversary Box Set. I have a separate video all about The Dark Side of the Moon and its many incarnations. I do touch on this box set a little bit. It's a pretty expansive box set. I would say it's a great box set. If you really are all about The Dark Side of the Moon, you might want to check that out. Also includes The Dark Side of the Moon live at Wembley, 1974. That was released as part of that box set, and later on they released it separately, so you can buy that as a single CD. If you buy it on vinyl, the versions on the vinyl are a little bit shorter compared to what you'll get on the CD and digital versions. Whew, well, that was a journey, wasn't it? Looks like this might be my longest video yet. So thank you if you made it all the way to the end. Link to another Tier List Tuesday episode on the screen. If you want to take a deeper look at me taking a deeper look at The Dark Side of the Moon, I got the video up here for you.